Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is part 2 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's video Stop Giving Yourself Excuses, which is based on a discussion I have, a 1 hour and 20-minute long video, but the discussion we had merely lasted an hour circa until he sort of muted me out of the conversation and kept talking by himself for 20 minutes, which is sort of a dick move, if there ever was a dick move, right? So I went 40 minutes into this one. I made a little jump from about 5 minutes until 40 minutes. And while I did that in the previous part 1 video, I remembered also that there actually was something between the 5 and the 34 minutes mark, right? And that I just blew past it while I was working earlier today. And it was, but I forgot to bookmark it. And now I'm sort of, okay, doesn't matter too much, right? But the point was he was talking about a blank slate. And when you do this kind of blank slate thing, something along those lines, and you can, when you listen to the video yourself, you can sort of take notes of what the exact expression was. But it was doing a blank slate in connection with doing metaphysics. Now, this is important because that's what I've been talking about all the time, right? So now he's sort of talking about blank slate, but he doesn't do it when he does metaphysics, right? And if you have listened through the video he's done on this, so-called essay he has produced, which arrived later last night after I had recorded part 1, it's sort of as I expected and said in the video. It was the usual mumbo jumbo ramble and criticizing, or sort of just throwing words around without definitions and jumping into knowledge and ethics and politics and back into experiences. Everything is 100% this and objectivity out of nowhere. This kind of sort of, and then very emotional, trying to manipulate your emotions into understanding you shouldn't listen to these people talking about the demon outside and so on, right? It's actually sort of almost like it's getting worse and worse, this mentality or this approach to talking about these things, right? It's I need to, when I'm done deconstructing these videos, and I might add that in the last part 1, I mentioned that might not be doing the rest of this video, but I am actually going to do it and let it take the number of parts it needs in order to get it done, because he's sort of pissing indirectly on me, right? Using me as an example, lumping me into a pile of crazy people that I don't belong into, because I can actually argue my way out of this cardboard box he's sitting in, right? And so therefore I have to redeem whenever he sort of mentions, in my opinion, when he sort of refers to people like me. So in this sense that he's not saying that guy said this and therefore he's an idiot, right? But he's referring to people who argue along these lines that he's framing it in are crazy and stupid and out to get you and whatever, right? So he's sort of indirectly lumping me into this crazy pool, right? Which is sort of also a very dickish move, right? It's like it's pointing finger at you passive aggressively by saying it indirectly, so you feel anger, but it's not because he's shouting at you directly, so to say, right? So it's sort of a passive aggressive way of shitting on people, right? So I'll just reminded you about that blank slate he's talking about, which is sort of apparently useful to use when you're doing metaphysics. And but I'm not going to blow through 30 minutes of a video over here before the part 1 part I deconstructed in part 1. And I'm going to just head on further from around the 40 minute and 10 seconds mark where I left off in part 1 and see what happens, right?
So saying human beings don't exist because human beings aren't 40 feet tall. I mean, that would, you go to a, I always think of the biology conference or the physics conference, right? Say, okay, you go to a physics conference and you say, none of you exist because human beings aren't 40 feet tall. Or, to be even more silly, none of us exist, including me, because human beings aren't infinitely tall. That wouldn't even be a bad joke. That would just be like, who let this mentally ill person in here and why are they on stage? So having a standard of validity, like the senses need to see inside things as well. And you need to be able to see infrared and X-rays, and you need to be able to hear like a dolphin and a dog and whatever Barry White does with his bass. That's just silly. You can stretch the spectrum to infinity and then say everything within that spectrum doesn't exist. Now, that's just silly. It's just, and of course, the other thing, of course, the person is, if they're arguing with you verbally, right, they're saying that the senses are invalid while using your hearing to transmit accurately their argument. And here's the thing, too. If you were to...
They are saying your senses are invalid. No, nobody said that. At least I didn't say that, right? I never said that your senses are invalid. In fact, I tried to get away from talking about senses before we had settled whether or not he understood this inherent paradox in his thinking, right? In his metaphysics. So he's just quickly running into his preconceived ideas about what I am, and potentially everybody trying to argue this way or argue for this, let's say, problem, right? That whenever they start to, it's almost like if they say metaphysics and they don't say, hey, objectivity and science, and then he's going to say, well, you're one of those, right? And I'm going to say, do you eat without eating, or something like that, right? And then people say, no, I want to talk about some philosophy that comes way before these weird questions you have, right? And then he sort of kicks people out of the debates one way or another, and he never gets to the point. After these sort of 40 years he's talking about, he's been doing philosophy, he's possibly so solidified in his thinking that he can't, he's irreceptible, he's what the words I'm looking for, he's unable to get to this kind of thinking because it's blocked off, because he's afraid, or he's not even afraid anymore, possibly. He's just sort of, they're crazy. So I'm not going to discuss this. I'm just going to, get them kicked out of my system so people don't get a wrong idea about this philosophy, even though that he considers it impossible and tries to argue for it. He's still afraid that they might fall for this, be tempted to fall for this sort of crazy talk, right? So you have to keep pounding on it in order to make sure that his fans doesn't, by being lured into bad philosophy, right? He's unable to consider that he might actually be wrong in his thinking, right? It's not a part of his. He's not sufficiently skeptical about his own stance, right? Which is a major quality mark of a good philosopher, is someone who is actually able to be skeptical about your own stance and is able to argue with somebody with a very different story, different philosophy, right? And sort of balancing it out, listen, but say, I can't see it fit into my system this way or that way or the other. But also actually be able to say to yourself, which is sometimes quite difficult, right? But, it's something you should be able to train yourself to do as a philosopher, which is being skeptical about your own thinking, right? And that is possibly much harder than you might think. And it's like when you think you have solved the problem, so to say, they get kind of mentally you know, carved in marble. They're being printed in metal, something like that, right? It's like now it's settled. I've got it. Now it's no problem, and I settled it. Now it's this is what I'm working from, right? But what I also realized when I did um found out that idealism, let's call it that, is very much closer to the correct metaphysics, right? I'm not saying it's perfect. Nothing is perfect in my opinion, right? That when I found out I had to adapt to that metaphysics, there were several other things in my thinking that also had to change. I couldn't just change my metaphysics because there was some part of my previous philosophy that was actually dependent on the old metaphysics, right? But because I had that old metaphysics, it was natural for me to go along those lines. But when I figured out there was a problem in my metaphysics, I had to change these parts of my philosophy also. And that points to that when you have settled on something, a lot of other conclusions follow from that. You're not, those conclusions, you are not, you are unable to find flaws in because they are based on assumptions that are previous to it. And that assumption must lead to that conclusion. So if that is base assumption is overturned, then the sort of house of cards of philosophy down the road will be overturned also, or have to be overturned, right? And there's a lot of psychology in this also, I think, because if you, for instance, is like Stefan Molyneux in the situation that you build this perfect philosophy and you have the greatest philosophy show on earth and you have the greatest books and the greatest philosophy books and novels, and it's also so great. If you were to find a flaw in the foundations of your philosophy, potentially all of the rest of your philosophy would be at least scrutinized, right? But might be overturned in large part of it, right? How would you go about doing that, right? So there's an inbuilt psychology that you actually don't really want to find any flaws, right? You might step over that, hurdle, or that, what would it call, step over a line between integrity and believing that you're right. Integrity and believing that you're right sort of melts together, and the integrity is, well, I'm right because it's me, right? So the integrity is that if you find some flaws, you have to scrutinize your whole philosophy, right? And that's also why the book I'm writing on, you could call it a treatise on philosophy, but it's basically a book on morality, ethics or morality, right? That when I started sort of 5 years ago or thereabout, quite soon after I started writing it, or decided I need to write this, right? Because I sort of got a epiphany, right? And then this change in metaphysics dumped into the system, right? And I was like, this changes everything, right? It potentially changes everything. It's not everything that is changed, but it changes everything in the sense that you have a new point of view about the story, right? The story of your philosophy, so to say. And I found out the approach of doing philosophy is basically incorrect in most philosophers' approach to philosophy. How they present it, right? So there's a core idea in the way I present it that I'm following from the start. And there's certain things that it's like my system wanted. System I'm talking about is don't want. I'm not a woo-woo guy, right? Just to make sure that's sure, right? You understand that. But it was. I have this sense that if there's something if I have I don't want to sort of, if I want to not write on my book, I sort of don't force myself to do it. I could be a little more, productive in my book writing, but it is like my mind is holding back because there's still something that needs to be settled, right? And I don't just want to write any old book. I'm writing one book on philosophy, and that's it, right? Nothing more, nothing less. I might do some, these videos and deconstructions, whatever, right? But I'm writing one book on philosophy, and that's it, right? That's the book. That's what I need to write. So it has to not be perfect. I don't like that term perfect, but it has to hang together, right? And if I have a sense that there might be something that can still be optimized to a level where it has this kind of minimal, likable product, to stay in sort of research and development mentality, it has to. There can be no holes in the in the in the story or the connection of the arguments, right? So it's like it's different with this dude, right? He is shouting at me for an hour in our so-called discussion, and then he felt inspired, to write an essay. And a couple of weeks later, he sits down and write an essay and says he's basically solved the problem, right? That's not how philosophy is done, in my opinion. You can't do that, right? And I will also point that out when I deconstruct that essay, because it's bloody fucking awful, right? So, but okay, let's head into this one before I spend too much time talking about other stuff.
Say, I've done this before, where somebody tells me that the senses are invalid or the senses can't be trusted.
I didn't tell him that the senses couldn't be trusted. That's something he's conjured up himself, right? I didn't say that. That's his interpretation. That it is flawed, right? I would actually say all you have are your senses, right? When you're talking about any kind of external world to the mind, let's say, right? That's all you have. God damn it, right? That's what you should focus on. I mean, not sit and focus on a particular color or anything like that, but metaphysically, you should focus on that, right? All the other bullshit, get rid of it. Start from the blank slate, and then your experiences, right?
And then I'll argue with them, and then 10 minutes later I'll say, oh no, but you already told me that the senses are perfectly valid. And they'll get really angry, really upset.
Yeah, so then they'll get angry. He's framing the discussion we had, and then he can always say, no, it was not particularly you I meant, if I were to sort of confront him about it, right? He said, no, it's some other guy that talked to like 2 years ago, whatever, right? This is passive-aggressive. You can sort of throw a shit in my direction, but then say, no, it wasn't you directed at you. It was, the dude behind you, whatever, right? That kind of approach, right? And it's also sort of a pathetic sign that he basically must have some kind of internal idea, if he's still have some well-functioning part in his brain, that he's not really that good at arguing these things, right? The way he has to sort of label people as crazy, and he has to use these emotional appeals in the way he phrases the words and so on, right? That's a sign of bad philosophy, right? I mean, if you had some good philosophy, you wouldn't risk people running away because they feel manipulated. You would make sure that they get the argument, the pure and good arguments, right? You wouldn't do this manipulation. It's a sign that it doesn't really work. There isn't really any good philosophical arguments in there, right?
Said, really frustrated. And I said, I never said that. I said, yes, you did. That's what I heard that. It's like, I never said that. Oh, so now my senses have to be valid and accurate in the transmitting of your arguments. Anyway, it's all very, very simple.
Yeah, but of course, if you're making sounds, right, you are implicitly saying that you are trusting that these sounds is going to make some kind of sense to that other thing over there, which you deem to be an individual who might be able to, receive those sounds and make sense of them in the same way that you're making sense of them, right? Of course. But that isn't the argument, right? again, it's this, and I remember why I was sort of frustrated in part one is the rest of this is just me keep saying that he doesn't understand the point, right? And it's sort of a futile endeavor, maybe, right? But I think there were a few things here and there in his talking where I have to sort of refute what he frames me as saying.
So consistency comes from the evidence of the senses. Your sense.
Consistency, what is that? Right? Because there's nothing you can compare it to. You can't compare it to, right? There is only one E equals mc squared, right? There's only one F equals m times a, right? There are only one of these. There's nothing there isn't consistency in the sense that if they look at that elephant and it walks over there, is that consistent? What if it had walked over there? Would that be inconsistent or what? But if it had walked over there, it wouldn't have walked the other way. And then I would just say that is consistent, right? So consistency is something about predictability or something like that. Yes, of course, I predict that my car is still standing out there on the parking spot, right? But that's reasoning. That is my mind reasoning about my prior experiences and my expectations of what I presume I will find in the future or objectify in the future, right? But what is consistency? Is it that the car is always there when I expect it to be there, right? Is that the consistency? Okay, fine. But it doesn't prove anything, right? If there weren't this kind of consistency, you would say there was some other kind of consistency. You would still say the universe is consistent, right? It would just be some other kind of physical laws. So it's like it seems like an empty argument to me that saying everything are as I expect them to be and they are that way. That's why it is of this kind. You seem to not add anything to it. I'm saying it's like saying that's an elephant and therefore it's an elephant, right? It's sort of a empty. It's a tautological. Is that what it's called, right? Yeah, that's an elephant, and that's why it's an elephant, right? It's consistent, and that's why it's consistent. So it's. I don't understand the argument, but I understand what he's trying to say because he's arguing against something that people like me who wants to get to this problem in materialist metaphysics is trying to point out that he's arguing against something else because he thinks that people try to tell him that the senses aren't valid, right? So it's sort of a complicated thing to argue against him because you have to say yes, of course they are, and then he'll say, well, then what the hell are you talking about? Well, I'm trying to point out that that thing you're experiencing might not actually be the thing, right? And then so you're crazy, right? So it's, I mean, if you have a better way of explaining this problem and you understand the problem, of course, otherwise I wouldn't ask, right? How to approach explaining it to someone who doesn't understand it, right? And it's not a part of their mentality. Then, as I pointed out in part one, it's very difficult to get sort of a the shovel under the whatever it's called, right? And so that people say, now I get it, right? Because I guess it's that there's an old picture of that is often used as an illustration for metaphysics with somebody moving through a shell, a sort of a shell around the earth or something like that, and then they're halfway through this shell, as if they're going to the other side or something like that. But that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that everything you experience is not the thing experienced, right? It can't both be the photograph of the moon and the moon at the same time, right? Otherwise, there's something then you have a different axiom you're working from in your metaphysics. And I can only see two possibilities here. Either you go with the inside-outside dichotomy, or you say, I'm a solipsist, right? I'm just living in experiences and they're just experiences. There's no spatiality to it. I'm not, there's nothing outside me, right? But that doesn't make sense to me to be solipsist, because then why are there those experiences, right? What are they there for? It makes sense. I mean, that's my sort of low down way of attacking it, right? Saying, well, you know, when I use my eyes and my ears and hands outside, and so it seems that there is some spatiality to it. And when you talk about this spatiality, well, then you start to talk about something being outside your mind, right? And it's just sort of falls out of it, right? And when you say that, okay, well, that outside of my mind, I can't have access to it, right? Because it has to be in my mind in order for me to experience it. And if it's an experience, it is exactly not that which is outside. If I claim there is an outside, it's based on, right? So it's this paradox or contradiction in this kind of materialist thinking that apparently is very difficult. I can empathize with the difficulty in seeing it, right? That it's like you are aware of something inside, and then you experience the outside, right? And then you try to make sense of that outside. You're not focusing on this over here, you're focusing on this here, and then you might be wrong about this, visage over here, right? What's it called? Visage in French, Fata Morgana. It's like it's the combination of the various aspects of the experience and the story you are telling about your experience is fundamentally flawed, right? That there is a contradiction, as I say, that can be there without you realizing it. If there is no real difference in me saying I only have the experience inside, or I am experiencing the actual outside, right? From a, it's like, how would I say it, right? I don't know how to explain this, it might be difficult, but if I'm looking at something through a scope, right? There's no difference in that thing I'm looking at, whether or not it's 10,000 miles away or it's sitting very, very, very close to my eyes, right? It's basically the same thing in this sense, right? So if I pretend that what I experience is the actual outside, it doesn't violate anything when I'm sort of alone with it, right? But the problem becomes when we have to deal with knowledge. It starts to become a problem, right? And it for real becomes a problem when you need to go to that objectivity, right? That's when, if you have this, the bad metaphysics, you will be claiming that what you experience is actually objective and certain and 100% and all that, as he says. And if somebody else disagrees with him, just like he says, they're crazy, right? Because he has access to that external world. But the idealist metaphysics tells you, no, you are living with that inner life or inner experience, which is particular or unique to you. That means when you are talking about external beings to your to your experience, you are having the experiential version of that being, not the real being, right? So you can't know what they're experiencing. And your own experience is also in your mind, right? So if you're both looking at a tree, you both have potentially a tree in your mind, right? But the point is, you can't know whether the other guy has a tree in his mind, and that other guy can't know if you have a tree in your mind, right? Because there's no access to that external world, direct access, right? That's where the sheep and the wolf are part ways, right?
Senses are consistent, right? There is a realm of consistency, our waking life when we're using our senses. There is a realm of consistency, and then there is a realm of inconsistency. There's a realm of Aristotelian non-contradiction, and A is A. An object can only be itself or something else.
Oh man, that's genius, right? An object can only be itself or something else. Then you covered all bases, right? It can only be itself or something else. I'm not really sure that's a good. It, I don't care about logic when we are doing metaphysics, right? Logic is something you do when you have knowledge, right? You make deductive logic or you make inductive logic reasoning, right? But that you don't use logic. There are things that follow from, if you have an axiom about something, then there are things that follow from that. But I don't think that's logic as such, right? I might be wrong about it, but I tend to want to push logic into epistemology somewhere, right? Or at the other end of, when you have found a definition of knowledge. And that, okay, if I experience elephant, right, it must have a trunk. So if I may have experienced elephant, even if I can't see the trunk, it must have a trunk, right? It's sort of deductive logic, right? But that entails that I have the experience of the elephant, which is, empirical knowledge, right? So it's sort of at the ascent of epistemology when we're doing that kind of logic. Now, there might be some other kind of reasoning which is quite similar to logic you use in metaphysics, which actually shouldn't be called logic. But, maybe that's a too gray area for me to actually delve into because I haven't thought that through, right?
An object can't be both itself and something else, right? 3 laws of logic. All of those are derived from the evidence of the senses. My daughter and I watched a funny video the other day where a man went up with a banana that was open and offered a bite to his girlfriend, and then she bit into it, and it turned out to be a rubber banana, and he pulled it, and then it snapped into her gently.
Okay, so she thought that it was actually a banana, otherwise she wouldn't bite it, right? So it's like, okay, so you were wrong. But if you never got to that point where you can say, aha, it's not really a banana, I'm just having the fake objectification of banana, then she would go about thinking that she has experienced a banana. So you might be able to say, well, she didn't, because you knew it wasn't a banana, real banana, right? But then you can say that about all your experiences. How do you know they are not all fake experiences? At what point do you know this can't be fake? When? I'm not saying that everything is fake, but how do you get to it, right? You will have to say, I don't know. You don't know if an elephant suddenly changes into a rhinoceros, right? Because you were wrong. There's no time limit or any sort of, okay, now I have experienced elephant for 20 seconds. Now it must be an elephant or something like that, right? There are no rules like that. In my opinion, there are no, matters of degree that can be knowledge or certainty or anything like that, right? So it's when you experience X, you know X, whether or not it's a real X or not, right? As long as you experience X, you know X, right? As long as you experience banana, you know banana, whether or not it's a fake banana, right? Then you might later find out it's not the real banana, but you're still having the objectification of banana, right? A fake banana is in some way still a banana because that's what you objectified it as, right? So these kind of problems with objectifications and senses and so on, he just glosses over them as, oh, yeah, there might be some gray areas here and there, but don't look at that. It's 100%, right? it's like he's not really arguing for things here, but he's just forcing himself to believe it. Like, if I just say 100% enough times, I'm going to believe 100%, something like that, right? There must be a word for that. I don't remember, right?
It's kind of funny, right? And so she thought that the banana was the banana, but it wasn't. It was a rubber banana, right? And I remember once, many years ago, in an open house, there was plastic fruit, and I was just curious how heavy it was, and somebody had tried to take a giant bite out of the plastic fruit. You could see the teeth marks. Probably identify the person if you had to. And so he thought it was fruit, but it wasn't fruit. So our senses are perfectly consistent. I've never had my senses be wrong. Never. And I think if people are honest, I mean, I've misinterpreted things for sure, but I've never had my senses be wrong. And we understand that.
You have misinterpreted, but you are never experienced your senses to be wrong. No, of course not. Because you're only experiencing whatever you're experiencing. If you're experiencing blue and red and whatever, there's no way of you of telling whether or not you should experience that color or sound or taste or whatever, right? And if it changes, well, which one of them were correct? If it can be wrong, it might go from correct to incorrect, right? Just because it changed doesn't mean that which it changed to is correct, right? So there's all sorts of problems in this kind of certainty approach to this sense discussion, right?
Evolutionarily speaking, I mean, the people who believe that God designed us, well, they would say that God wouldn't design something that would fool us. And the people into evolution, right? Let's say you're a sheer atheist.
Sheer atheist, not just a atheist, but a sheer atheist, right? Sheer heart attack.
And you accept evolution. Well, all you have to ask yourself is, well, we certainly need things in reality to survive: food, shelter, water, blah, blah, blah. Avoid predators, pursue prey, and we need to find somebody to mate with us.
Fighting, fleeing, fucking, and feeding, right?
Raise our kids. So we need things in reality in order to survive. And you would simply ask yourself, in the evolutionary pressures upon the sense organs, would those whose sense organs worked accurately and whose brain accepted?
But you are saying that because you survive, your senses are accurate. That is a fucking stupid argument, right? Yeah, they are sufficiently functional, but that's not the same as saying they're perfect, right? What is this fetish, right? I mean, if I'm walking on a savanna and 1 out of 20 elephants is not the real elephant, well, the chances I'm going to not be bothered by it anyway, right? So there's no way of, I mean, there's a lot of studies that point out that the mind creates a lot of that sort of reality that it experiences, right? You see the wheels going on carriages, old carriages, horse carriages, going the other way around, and there are all sorts of examples where it's obvious that the mind creates a trick, right? It tries to make sense of what is going on. So it's sort of, the mind is saying, I decide that this is what is going on, and then I'm going to be aware of that kind of going on. But and there's a very good example in my recent video I made. Maybe I should have had that ready in here, but about if you have a trapeze shaped or what's it called when it's not a square that is sort of bigger at one end and smaller on the other end, right? And then you turn it around, and then you have a something inside that window that sticks out on the perpendicular angle, right? When that moves around and you look at it, it looks as if the window is moving this way, back and forth, back and forth. Well, when you look at it from upside, it moves in sort of a what's called rotating fashion. And that, when it does this thing as if it's moving back and forth, this pen that is in the movie, it's like the pen is moving through the window in this weirdo fashion, right? But it doesn't do that. Or does it? How do you know what is right? How do you know that everything you experience is not just some weird story that the mind is telling? Well, there's no way you can get to it, right? You can decide it's perfect because it needed to be perfect, therefore it's perfect, right? It's like you need to, in order to be a good philosopher, you need to be very able to say, I don't know, right? You have to be willing to say, I don't know. I can't get to it, right? I can't get to that insight. If you stretch your knowledge or your insights, you're going to get it wrong later down the road, right? You have to stay focused on what you can do in metaphysics, right? Everything else will be screwed, and you will sort of stretch it beyond the actual reality of whatever you want to. You're stretching it, and you're forcing you're willing your way into philosophy rather than staying and being observant, right? That's the approach I want to take, right? And it's actually, in some ways, it's liberating that you don't have to consider all these things outside your mind because you do not have access to them, right? You have to be aware when you reason your way through things that there is this dichotomy, that when you refer to something outside, there is an actual outside you don't have access to, but an inside version that is experiential, right? Then when you argue for these parts in your philosophy, you have to be aware that there is an outside, but your experiences is what you have to work with. You can't go out there and say, now I can fabulate about what it actually is out there. Stay away from it, right? It actually makes things more cohesive and coherent. And it also gets rid of two big major problems in this metaphysics that Stefan Molyneux is so happy about, which is the problem of other minds and the hard problem of consciousness, which I also mentioned before for those who have followed me for a while, right? That you can't, for some reason, as a materialist, saying that you have access to this objective outside world, you can't experience other people's minds. Why? If some dude says he's experiencing an elephant, if I look at that dude, why can't I experience that elephant, right? You could say, yeah, it's inside his skull, there's a little elephant in there, okay. No, you can't do that, right? You can't experience, no matter what you do, you can only say there's something that lights up and so on, whether the easy problem of consciousness, right? And the hard problem is trying to explain what is it about the description of this physics that eventually turns out to be colors and tastes and sounds and so on. There's nothing in it that necessitates that you have to have a red experience, right? You can only correlate it. You can't make a causation, right? That's a big problem in this metaphysics. Well, idealism has an answer to that, and that is you can't get to it. You can't get to the answer. That's why there isn't an answer, right? I mean, in some weird way, you could say there is an answer, but it's inaccessible to us, right? Because we need an experience of it, and as long as it's an experience, it's not the real thing, right? So you can't get to it, right? You are inside all the time. You are never outside there, right? Even if you have an experiential version of that outside, it's still an experiential version on the inside, right? So,
that sense organ data accurately, would that be selected for survival? Well, of course it would be. If your eyes constantly got things wrong, you wouldn't survive, right? So I'm sure you know this, but your eye inverts light, right? So things that are closer look bigger and things that are further away look smaller. Well, that's not natural, right? Light beams spread. So you'd think that the things further away would look larger and less detailed, but your eye inverts these.
Is he saying that the mind creates that? Is he saying that the mind creates some difference in shapes and sizes? I'm not sure I understand this. It seems like he's contradicting him. Now he's talking as if he's talking about that which is going on inside. So it creates something as if it knows what is out there. And I have to adjust the sizes depending on distances and something like that. Let's see.
Things. So that the things that are closer look bigger and the things that are further away look smaller. And why is that? Because that's how we survive. Because the things that are closer are things that we need to pay more attention to, that we're working with, that we're crops that we're growing, or animals that we're skinning, like we need.
Yeah, there might be a tendency that which is closer tend to be more important. But if I'm sitting in the grass and there's sort of bushes around me, and then somewhere out there seems to be an elephant that is sort of far away from me, I would be focusing on that elephant, even though there's a lot of interesting bushes around me, right? I don't see this argument very, very interesting or very, very strong.
To see those things closer. And the things that are further away are less important. They're not unimportant, but they're less important. So, of course, we're going to see things that are smaller that are further away and see things that's bigger that are closer up. That's evolutionarily selected.
But if it's important, so if I saw an elephant way out in the distance, shouldn't it be big then? Way bigger than everything else around it. Because it's important. And how does the mind know what is important? I don't understand this argument. How does it know that? I mean, you can say the experience knows that it has to be a certain size in order for me to then become aware of the size. I can't connect these dots, I must admit. This is too strange for me.
Now, the accuracy of the senses, which religious people would accept because God wouldn't design something to fool you.
Oh yeah, so you're licking the ass of the Christians again, right?
And
using every possible, the Christians, they're on the right track. Yeah. The Inquisition was just, sort of, hardcore, communism within the Christian. Don't talk about that, right?
Atheists or Darwinists would accept because, of course, senses that didn't work would be selected out of the gene pool very quickly, very quickly. Which begs the question, how has metaphysics confusion survived? Well, I answered that in the essay, so I won't get into that here. But yeah, the senses are perfect. The senses don't lie.
How do you get to that conclusion, please, right? How do you get to it's like you have argued for it. No, you haven't argued for it. You haven't argued. You can't use prior experiences to validate the next experience, right? Because then if that prior experience needed to be validated by an even prior experience, then that prior experience has to be validated by another prior experience and so on backwards, right? So you can't use that to validate. First of all, it's a different category when it's a memory of something, right? Then it's not sense data, right? Even though might be considered based on it, right? Otherwise, you would be saying that a photograph of the moon you could land on a photograph of the moon, and that would be the same as landing on the moon, right? That would be fucking stupid. So if you are an empiricist, you need to have that sense data in the moment, in the now. You can only have knowledge in the now, right? And where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought there. Okay, let's head in.
This just give you information. And at least for me.
How do you know that you are handed information? Now it's like you're talking about a demon handing you stuff, right? I'm the guy saying, no, you don't know what it is, how it's supposed to be understood. It's like you're saying, no, there's no demon out there. But I'm handed information. So you are having a benevolent demon out there, right? Or let's call it X. You have a benevolent X out there handing you information, saying this is information, that red there is information. Go be informed about it, right? Is that how it works? How fucking ridiculous, man, right?
I've never heard things that aren't there. I've never seen things that aren't there. I've never once.
You have never seen things that aren't there? No, but you can't say that they aren't there. A thing that aren't there is sort of a freaky way of talking about things. That thing isn't there. That's bullshit, right? That's manipulation. That elephant isn't there. So I can say that I haven't experienced that elephant because it isn't there. I mean, oh, oh man, right? And he says that his way of doing metaphysics is slim and lean and perfect and sharp and so on. It's fucking fluffy all over, man, right?
Had my senses make any kind of foundational mistake. It's one of the reasons I've never done any drugs. The idea of screwing around with my senses would be, I mean, it's horrifying. It's a horrifying.
Does the drugs alter your senses or does it alter your mind? Right? Aren't you confusing things now? If you smoke whatever, does it go to your eyes and your nose and your ears? I think it goes to your mind, right? I might be wrong about that. I mean, if it's in the bloodstream, yeah, it comes through the nose and the eyes, and yeah, but it also comes through the brain, right? So how do you know this? How the hell do you get to all this, right?
Conception to me. The idea that, you know, I don't know, an LSD or whatever, you see things that aren't there and so on. It's like, oh my God, that's like, why would you want to make yourself voluntarily insane? Like, people who are...
No, I agree with that. I also very, when I was younger, I could get drunk, and I've smoked a bit of weed way back, very few times, and I got sick each time, right? And when party, there I was sometimes very drunk, very drunk. But I have been, there was one time I actually passed out. I was so drunk, and after that, it was actually at a wedding, like 15 years ago or something like that. And I just, drank like, and I think actually there was one who I thought it was some kind of light drink, and it was pure whiskey or something. I just, drowned myself in it, right? And I basically passed out on a sofa or a bed in an adjacent room. And one of my friends told me he saw me the first 1.5 hours, and then the only thing he could see was my ass because I was just face planting into this. He could only see my oh man, and I remember I woke up just to I woke up at some point, and then I don't know what the hell I wanted to do, but then I went out into the surrounding area. It was a lot of a complex of houses, right? And I was walking around in people's gardens, and at some point I sat down on somebody's chair, and I just smoked or something, and then they came out of out of their garden door and say, "What are you doing here? Hey, get away!" I was really drunk, right? Don't tell it to anybody. But I remember after that, I thought that was too crazy, right? And I was halfway not my own fault, right? But I'm responsible for what I put in my face, right? So I decided I'm not going to get drunk anymore. I enjoy a beer. I've never had any tendencies to be like drunk or anything like that. I've never been. The only thing I have been, dependent on at some point was smoking, right? but that I quit that like 14 years ago, 13 years ago, and at the same time I basically said I'm only going to be drinking a glass of wine and a glass of beer or whatever now and then. I'm not smoking anymore, right? So, and I stood by that. I haven't been drunk, not even close to being it, right? When I go at parties, I have a glass of wine, and then after an hour, I might have a beer, and then after another hour, I take a soda, and then another hour, maybe another beer, and something like that, right? So I sort of taste the goodies, but I never get drunk, right? And even if you have to drive home and so on, I actually prefer not to have any alcohol at all in the blood when I'm driving, because it doesn't take much to slow you down. I mean, just half a beer or something like that can make you sort of slow your senses, as it says, right? I don't know why I'm talking about this, but I agree with him that, and as I've started also to philosophize, I don't like to screw with my my experiences, right? I like to be as clear as I can, right? So I'll give it. I'll agree with that.
Going through florid psychosis, having total breaks with reality, hearing demons telling them to drown their children, or all this kind of monstrous stuff, right? That's at the very extremity of mental illness, mental dysfunction, and often produces great immoralities. Why you would voluntarily want to put yourself in a state of florid psychosis, never understood that.
No, but that's not. So now you are sort of framing people as completely crazy, and the only problem is you do not understand the argument, right? You don't understand. You don't get the argument. The penny hasn't dropped for you, right? I mean, I'm educated and have worked in the natural sciences for many decades, right? Several decades. I was educated in natural sciences as far back as the early 80s, right? And I've been in that mostly ever since. And I'm still I'm working in management that has to do with software and hardware. It's very straightforward, sort of scientific, right? So it's not like I'm trying to. No. I have to confuse people because I have a weird ideology or a weird sense of ethics. So if I can confuse them with bad metaphysics, I can get them to doubt themselves so much that I can enforce my weird ethics on them. Why the hell would I want to do that? I'm not saying that aren't people out there doing that. There's a lot of that kind of. I would agree with that. There is a lot of that kind of manipulation, right? But if he cannot recognize me as someone who can actually argue or is inquisitive enough to figure out what kind of man I am, right? Then he's just labeling people left and right as that which he sees fit, right? I mean, I'm good at math, I'm good at physics, I'm good at chemistry. I can, I played outside all my youth in building rafts, building cars, playing football, climbing in trees and finding fruit and all these things that boys do, or boys used to do, right? I'm so close to reality as you possibly can get. But that doesn't mean that I'm experiences outside my mind, right? Oh, man.
Why would you want to dissolve the boundaries between reality and fantasy?
Yeah, but if you have that mentality when you talk to people, no wonder that you're not going to get to the next level, right? And there's also, I think, something about this Immanuel Kant and the noumena and the phenomena thing there, and Ayn Rand. She is sort of the antithesis of of Immanuel Kant, right? Randian people, they basically hate Immanuel Kant because they think that he's out to destroy their sense of reality, right? And that is sort of bringing, since he read the Fountainhead or whatever these novels are called, Atlas Shrugged, for 40 years. So he's not going to leave Ayn Rand behind just because somebody says, I think Immanuel Kant might be right? So he's like, oh, go away. Where's my garlic, right?
Why would you want to have waking dreams? It's a nightmare. And what it produces in people is this radical subjectivism, and it's a victory of the abusers over.
It creates. So it's like he's talking about you're being infected. It's sort of halfway paranoid, right? You're being infected and it will spread through you and you will become a radical skepticist. Oh, man. Oh, man. Ankara, now you can make a GIF, right? You can make a really good GIF, right? Almost like, my precious. Oh, my God.
The integrity of the mind. So, we do have the ability to reject the evidence of our senses, of course. And I think we're unique in our power, our capacity to do that, to reject the evidence of.
Okay, we are unique. Okay, so he has all sorts of claims that can't be substantiated, right? All sorts of claims about what's going on out there, and the lizards can't do this, and the monkeys can do that, and what's on the other side of the universe, and he's so knowledgeable about everything out there, right? It's just, I got it, man, right? Oh, man.
For our senses. And that's good. It's good that we can reject the evidence of our senses. And that's how we get science. That's how we know
what
things about the universe that our senses contradict. Like the world is round, it looks.
What? He just said that the senses are perfect. Now the senses contradict them. What the fuck is the matter with you, man? I have to hear that again. I actually missed this part when I listened through it the first time. I don't remember this. This is strange. Let's hear it again.
We do have the ability to reject the evidence of our senses, of course. And I think we're unique in our power, our capacity to do that, to reject the evidence of our senses. And that's.
But isn't that what you're trying to argue you shouldn't do? I mean, what the fuck, man?
Good. It's good that we can reject the evidence of our senses. And that's how we get science.
You get science by rejecting your... Science is a reference to a scientific method, which is a principle you follow to make sure that you're not just, conjuring up stuff you want to be the case, right? And it's based on empirical data. So it's based on knowledge, at some point at least, right? And you draw some kind of conclusion, you see repeatability, as you're also talking about, and then you say when you repeat it 3 or 4 or 5 times, whatever the criteria is, then you say, okay, I guess this is going to be the case for the rest of, the history of the universe, right?
That's how we know things about the universe that our senses contradict. Like the world is round, it looks flat, and all that.
So what is actually going on here, right? He's talking about the senses are perfect. He's never seen any flaws. And now he says it's contradicting the senses. So what is it contradicting? His reasoning. So now his reasoning is better than his senses. When do you get to decide to do that? Otherwise they were perfect. So now they're not perfect anymore, right? So now you're reasoning your way to, no. Okay, in this case, they're not perfect. It's something else. But shouldn't reasoning then be perfect, right? It's like, it's so unbelievably stupid, man, right? Oh, man. Oh.
Kind of stuff, right? So yes, we can reject the evidence of our senses. That's a great strength. In science, it's a great weakness. in philosophy. So the senses are perfectly consistent.
But is science not a spin-off from philosophy? So you shouldn't reject your senses when you figure out what science is, and then you say, okay, science says go reject your senses, at least sometimes. But you were basing on philosophy that where you shouldn't reject your senses, or what? What is this fucking babble about, right? Do you have any clue what you're talking about? Are you just brain farting into the microphone? It sounds like it, to me at least.
When I was a kid, if I couldn't find something, and if you've grown up in a household where it's messy, that's usually on the parent, right? If you've grown up in a messy household, you know that maybe you save a little bit of time by not tidying up, but then you lose much more time by just looking for things all the time. But when I was a kid, if I would lose something, I would have this, it was just an idle fantasy, but I have this fantasy that, space aliens are beaming it up to examine it and understand it like anthropologists. And then they beam it back down. But, it's slightly inaccurate, so sometimes it doesn't end up in the same place. It just moves a little. So, yeah, we have the ability to reject the evidence of our senses, which is great in science, terrible in philosophy. But that doesn't mean the senses are invalid. So the sense, if we look at the horizon, it looks perfectly flat, right? And you have to go pretty high up to see the curve. Not like hovering over a Kardashian. But your eyes are simply showing you blue, line, sky. Even sky is just a conclusion, it's a label, a conceptual label, beget. So if you say the world is flat because it looks flat, well, your eyes are simply transmitting information to you. Every conclusion then is on you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course it's on me. I'm having the experience, right? Yes. Are we going into sort of flat or round earth discussions here?
So given that the senses are perfect and perfectly consistent, and if they...
He just said that the senses contradict sometimes. And then you find out they're contradicting. What fucking planet is he living on? He can just make up exceptions when he needs it. Yeah, they're perfect. Except if I'm reasoning in a certain way, then they're contradictory. What the fuck, man?
If they weren't, this conversation wouldn't be possible. It's given that the senses are perfectly consistent.
Conversation? You're talking to yourself, aren't you? There might be somebody listening in, but I don't hear anybody else talking.
Why do we get the laws of logic from? We get the laws of logic from the consistent properties and behaviors of atoms and energy.
Atoms and energy?
Gravity is a constant.
But you can't experience atoms. Atoms is a mind trick, or sort of a model, a mental model of whatever it might be down there, right? Nobody has experienced atoms, and if you can experience atoms, I would like to know. You're just saying, yeah, that thing I have here is made of atoms, and therefore I must be experiencing atoms. No. That's a kind of reasoning based on a model, right? You're not experiencing atoms, right? You're experiencing black, hardness, dirt, sweat, leather, right? Colors. That's what you're experiencing. You're not experiencing atoms, right? Atoms are models. They're mental abstractions.
Electromagnetism is a constant, radiation is a constant, fission and fusion are constants. Why we get sunlight, one of the two. Fusion? Fission? I can't remember. Fission in the sun for the correct answer.
There's another thing I want to get into. When he talks about the senses as being perfect and all that, right? What are they actually doing, these senses, right? Aren't they just picking up vibrations from those objects you're referring to? If you're saying that elephant is way over there, outside my mind, then the elephant is not traveling into your mind and manifesting itself so that you know there's an elephant. No, there's something bouncing off that object that your mind receives, right? Or your senses receive, and then something is created in your mind. How can the mind know that whenever it receives photons, it is supposed to create an elephant out of it, right? There's nothing about photons that says elephant, right? And if it's all that it's ever got are photons, how does it know about elephants? As if those elephants are out there. They don't, right? Why can't you get to this, man, right?
So we only have science, we only exist, we are only alive because of the absolute consistency of the behavior.
Yes, if you couldn't see an apple and an orange or a potato, but all you could see were little labels on it that said, eat this, eat this, eat this, right? And you eat this, including the label, and you survived. You would say, I can't survive without these labels that says, eat this, eat this, eat this. And I know everything that's going on out there that says, eat this, are objective and perfect, right? But you're actually eating something else you can't experience, which is the apple underneath. Right? Now I am referring to an apple as if but the point is when you experience things, you don't know what it actually is. You only have that experience of it, right? But that's enough because it is repeating itself and it has this constant structure. Whenever you see an apple, you get the same kind of experience out of it. But you don't have to understand what it really is in order to eat it, because you have to just know when you have that experience. You eat whatever it is out there based on that experience, right? Just like if you always saw only a photograph of X and not saw the real X, but you knew whenever you saw that photograph, you could eat the X without understanding what it was, and you would survive, then it would work. You don't need to know what the actual thing is, because you can't know it, right?
Of matter and energy. And I gotta tell you, like, I know everybody wants to wiggle out of these things and find some, oh, there was this gold leaf experiment where blah, 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 blah. It's like, no. And, the quantum mechanics and the quark levels, like, no.
Oh, you just talked about atoms and matter, didn't you? And now, when we're talking about quarks, no. Go away with that. But atoms, yes, fine. But what are atoms made of? Quarks? Yeah, but that doesn't matter. I mean, atoms, you can talk about atoms, but you can't talk about quarks, right?
Philosophy deals with sense data. Philosophy is about morality, and morality does not exist.
Yes, sense data, exactly. Sense data. Let's call it sense data. So you don't experience atoms, right? What sound does an atom have? What taste does an atom have? You're not experiencing that. It's a mental idea. It's a model for something that might be down there, which you can't experience. And there hasn't been found anything to contradict that model yet, right? So we are still believing in the model because it hadn't been refuted yet.
Or is measurable at the subatomic level. Come on. Well, this guy strangled another guy, so we're going to put the 3 atoms in his hand in jail. I mean, it's not, they're responsible. They made the moral choice. Come on. Everybody, I'm telling you, though, there's such a beautiful life and a beautiful world on the other side of...
Oh, there's such... Come over to the dark side, the light side, right? Quit your weird philosophy and go to free domain, where all the sane people are. Yes, go to the light side of free domain, right? We are here to help you. All the lamb has been lost. Come back to the fold.
Just taking a deep breath. Just accept this shit.
Just accept. Just accept it because you say so? Who the fuck do you think you are? Just accept it, man. How dare you be a fucking philosopher, claim to be a philosopher, when you're commanding people to just accept things? I'm fucking triggered now, right? What the fucking idiot asshole, man, right? Don't tell people just to accept things, right? I don't want to go into parallels from history of the world when people said, just accept this, right? Get the fuck out of my face.
Just accept it. Just accept it. Your senses are valid. If they're not, I would suggest you seek medical help.
How do you know? And if they're not valid, yeah, they're valid. They're 100%. But if they're not, go seek help. That's his fucking metaphysics, right? He's the fucking crazy one, right? It's completely incoherent, mind farting onto the microphone, right? It doesn't hang together in any sensible way that, it's also, this is perfect. Unless, there's an exception, right? Oh, man, right?
If you can't hear,
he's a lost cause, right? I mean, what would it take for somebody to be able to argue this with him, right? I mean, I'm not saying I'm the perfect dude to do it. I tried the best I could, right? Out of my great big heart in order to save philosophy, right? I must admit that I wouldn't mind if the penny dropped for him and then see what happens, right? And how he would handle it. But I think he can't get to it, right? He thinks that it's crazy talk. So he wouldn't even have an urge to do it. He would have an urge to do the exact opposite, right? Is solidifying himself even more. Go and write a new essay about how perfect his metaphysics is, right?
Here, go to an ear doctor. If you can't see, go to an optometrist. If you can't taste anything, blame Wuhan or British cooking. So, yeah, your senses work. Just accept it. Your senses are valid, and
just accept it. Is this your philosophy, right? Is this what you're basing on? Yeah, I'm just accepting it, and that's why I have a biggest philosophy show in the world. I'm just accepting it. Unless it's contradictory, then I'm reasoning my way, right? Yeah, so I'm just accepting it. Oh, man, right? Oh.
Matter behaves in perfectly consistent manners. I mean, if it didn't, there's no way we could shoot a spaceship past Pluto, right? Just couldn't do it. Well, we couldn't even have this conversation. You think of all of the immense amounts of complexity involved in having this conversation, from the diaphragm in my microphone to the transmission of the data from me to you receiving it through the speakers or whatever sound you're hearing, headphones. I guess headphones are just small speakers. Everything that is involved in this communication requires that matter and energy behave in perfectly predictable manners. And scientists cannot find exception.
No, it's the other way around for you. You are experiencing a coherency, and then you're saying, I understand what is going on because it keeps doing the same thing, right? But there's no guarantee that it's just not going to change. How the hell could you know? Because you can't know. You don't have that experience yet, right? It might just, for some reason just change and everything is green from now on, right? And smells like, beaver. Maybe not beaver.
To this. They cannot find exceptions to this. And again, there's fuzzy boundaries, but fuzzy boundaries don't mean anything when it comes to certainty. Right? There's black, there's white. We get that, right? And then there's, some gray in the middle where it's kind of ambiguous. That doesn't mean that black and white don't exist or are invalid, right? The fuzzy boundary.
No, but when you're defining things, right? When you're defining something like morality, there can't be fuzzy boundaries, right? Because that's where people like the state and all sorts of other bullshit creeps in, right? When you're defining knowledge, there can't be any fluffy boundaries. It has to be fucking strict and straight, right? Sharp as a kitchen knife. You can't have fluffy boundaries. Yes, there might be something that is fluffy in your experience, but whatever you label as knowledge, it has to be freaking clear. Otherwise, you can't get to objectivity, right? If you have to say, I guess it's a kind of an elephant thing, right? And the other guy says, I'm not so sure it's an elephant. No, doesn't work, right? And if that has to be the basis of something later called ethics, it doesn't work at all, right?
So going to the surfing at the edge of knowledge stuff and saying there's uncertainty there, therefore there's nothing that's
At the edge, go surfing at the edge of knowledge. I don't like this kind of, artistic liberties it takes in describing these things. I mean, now again, to crack a joke, fine, right? But when you're doing these kind of things, please be very precise, right?
certain. It's ridiculous. Right? If you grow up in a town and around the town are woods, and then you go and explore the woods, does that mean you have no knowledge of the town because you're in woods you don't know yet? No.
No, you don't have. You can't know a town, right? Because you can experience town. You can experience whatever, and then you can label that as town, right? You should know that you can't experience town. That's one thing. But let's say you are experiencing X, and when you walk out into somewhere else, and you're not no longer experiencing X, by the definition of empiricism, you do not have a knowledge of it, right? You do not have fucking knowledge of it if you don't experience it. Why are you not adhering to your own principles, your own definitions of knowledge, right? Another point where you are completely off the hook, man, right?
Of course not. I mean, I've thought, and I wrote about this in my book. You ever have this funny...
Just because you have a memory of something you experience doesn't mean that thing that you have a memory of exists, right? I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. That's the conclusion you think that people are going for. Just because I can experience means that it doesn't exist. No. If somebody asks you, do you know if X exists, and you don't experience X, you have to say, I don't know. Learn to say, I don't know, right? Grow up, man. This certainty fetish is going to fucking, be a mantra that is sucking the lifeblood out of your philosophy.
You thought, like you're on a train or something, or a bus, or I guess a car too. Anywhere, you're just someplace new. And if you're in a train and you're looking out the window and someone's backyard is there, well, that backyard just, flashes past you in an instant. It's there and it's gone. However, for the person who grows up in that backyard, they know every single square inch of that backyard. If you grew up in a house, the backyard you grew up in, you know every inch of it. You know where the ants' nests are. You know where the trees are going to fall. You know where the hole in the fence is. Absolutely. So somebody in a train flashing past is just there and gone. But for somebody who grew up and spent 18 years in that house, most of it playing in the backyard, they know every inch of that. So you have virtually no knowledge of the backyard, just an impression flashing past, but they have intimate, deep, and powerful knowledge about that backyard, which they will mostly retain for the rest of their life. I remember when I was in university.
So what? Of course,
I shared a room
man.
with a fellow because I was brilliant. And I remember one day shortly after we got in there, someone knocked on the door. And it was a guy, he was probably in his 30s, seemed kind of old to me now. It would seem kind of young to me now. It's again part of the relativity of things. But he had sort of this curly black hair and a big nose, and he came in and he was like, oh, guys, listen, I don't want to interrupt. This was my room. This was my room when I was in college. I spent 2 years here. This is my room. And he looked and he said, oh, my gosh, yeah, that window that sticks and that little depression in the wall and that bottom plug, I don't know if it got fixed. It didn't work when I was there. And, just all these things, right? Now, we just moved in. We didn't really know much about the room, but he was like moved and emotional and, oh, this room. And, I had such great times here and my youth. And he's got all of this knowledge of the room, which we just moved into. So the fact that